It's a pleasure to host you again. Our next session is a panel discussion on the theme Thriving in a Disrupted World, Managing Workforce of the Future. The workplace consists of digital nomads who believe in dynamism and creativity. But how do organizations manage the changing, unpredictable, and dynamic workforce in the new workplace environment? How are organizations evolving their new workforce management strategies? What does it take for companies to build a unified workforce? These are some of the questions that we'll be picking up in the discussion that's going to follow. Now, to chair this session, I would like to warmly invite Puneet Swani, Talent and Rewards Business Leader, Mercer. For over 18 years, Puneet has advised organizations on people and HR issues in over 20 countries across Asia, Middle East, and Africa. He loves the challenge of measuring the impact of every HR intervention on business outcomes. A very warm welcome to you, Puneet. I would request you to introduce the panelists. Thank you so much and keep learning. We look forward to a great session.
Thanks so much, Ruby, for a great introduction. And let me do the honors and first introduce our very experienced and esteemed panelists which we have today. Let me start first by Jacob, who's the Group CHRO for Columbia Asia Healthcare. Jacob's an HR professional with over 21 years of experience in strategic HR consulting, international HR, and startup HR. Our second panelist is Sarah Hassan, who's the Director HR from Hong Kong, Macau for Philip Morris International. Sarah again has multifunctional experience with banking and tobacco industry, functional experience in departments such as finance, business planning, supply chain, warehouse, procurement, HR services, and org development. Our third panelist, Saeed Ali, Global HR Director for Global Fashion Group, which is one of the leading emerging markets fashion e-commerce company. In the group HRD role, Syed delivers corporate HR leadership and also acts as a strategic advisor to the 5 group companies around the world. Last but not the least at all is Dr. Shalini Lal, who's the founder for Infinity OD. It's a boutique OD consulting firm specializing in innovation and organizational change. Dr. Shalini's expertise lies in exploring the human resource processes behind the creation of new ideas and development of an innovation engine that builds a culture of transformation. So, a warm welcome to all of you. Really looking forward to the discussion and hoping our attendees gain a lot of insight and a lot of practical experience from all of your work which you've done in the area. Ruby did start with talking a little bit around the topic itself, which is, how do we thrive in a disruptive world? How do we prepare for the workforce of the future? And I thought, let me give you some context around, why are we in a disruptive world? What is the disruption? Who is causing this disruption? How do we then keep our employees more engaged rather than be concerned about what skills in the future would be required? How would the workforce of the future shape? And as soon as we do that, I'm going to, kind of use the experience of our panelists to talk about that uncertain future. What have they been doing in their organizations, or what they've been doing, over a number of years in helping either overcome this disruption, in helping to help their employees thrive, and prepare for this uncertain future. So let me straight away get into I hope you all can see my screen around the Thrive. As I said, there are a number of workforce or impeding distractions and disruptions we are seeing in the world. First and foremost is around the whole impact around automation, robotics, machine learning, globalization. They're all reshaping how work gets done, right? They're reshaping value chains. They're driving business model change. The World Economic Forum predicts that there is a seismic shift which is going to happen not only in industries which are either expanding or contracting because of these changes, but also in the skill sets which are required. There are estimates that 1/3 of the skill sets required by 2020 are going to be very different from what they are right now. So how do we prepare for this disruption with all of these, technological changes which are happening? Now, while these changes are happening, the changes are not only happening on the business or on the work front as well, right? There are a number of changes we are seeing in our socio-economic demographic outlook. Uh, People are living longer, and if they're living longer, they need to plan about retirement. How much more money will they require because the average age expectancy is going to be higher, for example. When we have women playing senior roles in the workforce, but at the same time juggling between being a primary caregiver for the family or for the elderly parents, how is that going to impact women's participation rate? Last but not the least is the whole concept of, when your workforce is going to be either working from home or not even coming to office, how do you manage a workforce in a very virtual world where a lot of the old levers of engagement or employee satisfaction might not work because you don't have any physical contact around it. So clearly, all of these disruptions are impacting what we say as our future of work, and as organizational leaders, we need to be prepared for these changes as they happen. Uh, We've also seen a lot of global workforce expected to have significant churn between job families and functions. We are clearly looking at the administrative and the white collared function being at the risk of being decimated with computer, mathematical, architecture, and engineering functions or job families which are expanded to grow. Similarly, the manufacturing and production sector, which has been going down, is expected to further go down, but probably technology improvements might help us there as well. What we're clearly seeing is that the future growth of jobs is going to come from smaller, niche, highly focused industries, and not from broader or industries which we primarily seen around. So what does it mean? It basically means that as business leaders, what are those strategies, capabilities I need to prepare for this, building for this unknown future? We right now don't know about what skills will be required, right? Because one third of the skills might be very different from what we require. As HR, how do I retain that workforce then, right? Are we going to use the traditional methods? But guess what? 40% of our workforce is going to be freelancers. How am I going to do employee engagement of these freelancers? How am I going to look at, talent management of these freelancers? All very critical questions, and very different from the way currently our HR systems and processes work, and how currently we use to attract and retain works. Now, all of this also has an impact, and the most important player around it, which is the employees themselves. Employees are asking questions around which are these future skills? How do I develop these future skills? Which are the skills which are going to give me a premium for next 5 or 10 or 20 years? So all of these simply mean they're also looking at what is in it for them in this future. So we did a study around, a huge number of organizations globally, about 800 to be exact, in terms of what does thriving mean for an employee in this uncertain world, right? So how do we take this opportunity and redesign that world of work? How do we take this opportunity and build up kind of a very strong, better talent pool? And as HR, how do we contribute to that agenda so that our businesses are up and running and they have the right skills to deliver that? Technology is changing, we all are aware of it. Value chains are shifting. Look at from Kodak pictures to digital cameras to iPhones. Companies are also continuing to redefine their remit. Amazon buying health foods, which basically means that now you need to manage a workforce which is e-commerce, but also into food. Clearly, our challenges are going to be how do we keep productivity up, but at the same time have our employees learn new skills. How do we set direction, but also leave enough room for innovation, because you're also talking about innovation and improvements, right? How do we retain high potential people, but we also need to reward our current performers who might not have future skills, but have great current skills and are performing currently as well. That's going to be the opportunity for us in terms of it. Couple of key findings which came in from employees themselves on what they defined as, what did it mean, what did it mean for them to thrive? Not surprising, across the regions, career and development opportunities being provided by the organization, learning opportunities being provided. Uh, and interestingly, fair assessments also came in. So employees are saying, I don't only want to know about what is my performance, I also want to know about performance of my peers. How did you differentiate that? Were you transparent and visibly differentiating that performance? That's where the fair assessments come in. Now, what was interesting from an Asia Pacific or an Asia perspective was the focus on strategic workforce planning, where we found out that a lot of organizations who had done a planned way around how much workforce will they require, which processes will get automated, what will it mean in terms of the skills which is required of that future in terms of operating those machineries or running those machineries. That has also made a very big difference in terms of helping organizations thrive. Uh, Very quickly to conclude, what we've clearly seen is if we want thriving organizations, we need to start with the human part of that organization, which is the people. How do we make individuals thrive? And as you saw in the previous slide, a lot of that has been around, how do you provide me with learning and development opportunities? How do you provide me with empowerment to take decisions? How are you making my work lifestyle more healthier and balanced around it? What about the culture or environment you have in our organization? Is it inclusive? Is it diverse enough? Is it being adaptive to having, saying, full-time employees and freelancers working together? And how is it committed to, well-being, which is beyond just wellness in terms of that? And a combination of this is what we feel is going to result in a key and a thriving organization. Now, if you have to do all of these things, it means a lot of things from an HR perspective. What we've tried to do here, and these are some of our thoughts, and I'm just going to immediately, ask our panelists on what they think around it. But from our perspective, we think that an HR team or an organization needs to start at the first part around it, saying what is going to be that future people strategy. How many of those people are going to be affiliates or freelancers? How are you going to attract them? Why should they work for you and not for your competitor? What kind of talent management programs are you going to have for them? What is your value proposition, the rewards value proposition? People are looking for purpose. People are looking for something which is much more than the basic elements of comp and ben. How do we create that work environment? As I said, around inclusiveness, diversity, and the whole use of data, the big data analytics, to come up with a lot of these answers rather than guessing, rather than assuming to say, oh, we know the Gen X or the Gen Y, likes cash and not benefits. Do we have enough data or analytics to prove it? Are some of the examples around it. So that was a very quick overview around what we've seen in terms of our Thrive research. How can we help organizations prepare for the future? Uh, with this, what I'm gonna do is kind of throw it open to our panelists, and kind of uh, ask them questions around how would they see some of these changes and disruption impacting their own organizations or what they've seen in the future. Uh, can I ask, and let maybe start by asking Dr. Shalini, maybe the first discussion we can start with you around, uh, you do a lot of work around innovation, you do a lot of work around change. How are you even defining that future of work? So, what are some of these key things? And I did speak about technology and this, but what else is impacting or what is creating this future of work to be so different than what it is currently? Because, organizations have been there for the last 100, 200, 300 years. Why is it such a big difference now?
Thanks, Puneet. That's a great question because I think that's really on top of everybody's mind. See, we've had organizations for a long time, as you said, and we've even had automation for the longest time. So, through different sets of technologies coming in, we've seen, the way work is done evolve continuously. But what seems to be dramatically different this time is that the technologies which are emerging are able to, in a sense, do work that is very white collar, or work that till even 2 or 3 years ago was considered as, very not easy to automate. So, even things like checkout clerks or, warehouse workers, which weren't considered jobs which were easy to automate. Technology has progressed far faster than most people had anticipated. So today we're sitting at a time when technology has progressed faster than our ability to think through, the implications that technology is going to have. And it's challenging, the kind of white collar jobs that we've prized over the last 50, 60 years. So most of us as professionals have built our career through being, analytical, cognitive, having experience with a variety of conditions, and therefore being able to make judgment calls. But what we're seeing is that, with AI entering so many different applications, it is no longer the case that, humans will necessarily be better at certain kinds of decision making that we prized all along. So that's the first thing. We're directly, we're at a place where technology is directly challenging some of our prized possessions, as it were. The second piece, which is really, really different, is because of globalization, the speed with which change will occur, as and when commercial applications of these technologies become available. Now, as a human society, we've just never dealt with such rapid change on such a vast scale. So where we are today is very different from where we've ever been. So in that sense, while we've always had change, we've neither had change as dramatic and as all-encompassing, and nor have we had change which has the likelihood of, spreading as fast as it can today because of, globalization. And the nature of technology itself is such that once you find a good application for solving a particular business problem, it's very easy to replicate. So, the very nature of technology itself allows for speed at a completely different pace. The other thing which is, very different is that so far, and we've all heard this, all our growing up years and work years, that technologies come in as an aid to, human beings, and better jobs get created on the back of technology. And while that is, I'm sure, something that will happen in the next few years as well, what isn't at all clear is whether there will be enough of such jobs. So that part is coming under question in a way that really wasn't under question before. So if you look at some of the reports you yourself referred to by World Economic Forum or ILO, you'll see that this is a cause of concern because technologies are competing with humans in their ability to do certain parts of work. So that part's really different. The final point is that the organizational structures we're all familiar with really came on the back of the Industrial Revolution about 100 years ago. So we are dealing with organizations which are great at scale. We've really figured that out. Well-run, efficient organizations understand management and they understand scale. The challenge is that now, with that scale, they're going to have to bring in agility and innovation. And that's a really, really hard ask. And there will be organizations which will do this really well, but it will mean learning a completely new set of skills. So how do you manage scale and how do you manage innovation at the same time? And both of them require completely different mindsets. So those are some of the really, really dramatic shifts we're seeing today. And we haven't been here before. So where we are today is a new place. We haven't been here before. Our future will emerge in ways that we can't quite predict. So, a leader I spoke to some months ago said that old ways of work are crumbling and new ways of work are yet to emerge. And I thought that was just a beautiful summary of where we are. So even when as HR, we sit and make plans, the reality is that there are too many moving parts at this point, too many uncertainties. So we may not be able to see very far ahead. We know that there'll be big shifts and we know there'll be change, but we'll sort of have to work our way through as these changes actually hit our own industry or our own organization.
Perfect. No, thanks for that, Shalini. A couple of very key takeaways for me, personally around the speed of change, which is different now compared to earlier. How do we use that technology around it rather than worry about what skills would be required 5, 10 years later? Maybe we need to look at the next couple of years and say how is technology automating certain processes and what skills will we require. So thanks for sharing. I think that's a lot of very relevant points around it. Jacob, I'm going to move to you now and probably ask you a question which is probably getting discussed in most of the business forums and not necessarily only HR forums around the future of work and the point that machines are going to replace humans, right? The way everything is getting automated, robotics, if some of us who are in Singapore, if you go to the National University of Singapore, you have a robot receptionist greeting you rather than an actual person kind of greeting you. Where do you see this going? Is it that robots or machines would replace humans in the next 5, 10, 20 years? What's your view on that future of work?
Thanks, Puneet, for that. I think you laid the context very well, and I think Dr. Shalini also spoke about uncertainty. But having said that, I have a few perspectives on, Puneet, from what you asked and the future of work. See, if you look around us, what's really happening? There's really disruption everywhere. And disruption is happening not only in the form of technology, it's also happening in the form of talent. Look at cities which were not so famous a couple of years back. Look at how those cities have sprung up today. And I know in terms of what's happening in those tier 2, tier 3 cities and in emerging markets, what's happened. So talent, there is more of talent mobility. There is more opportunities which have sprung up, but still we have a global problem of talent is scarce. And the fact that we're talking about data analytics, artificial intelligence coming in, but in spite of all of this, what's really happening is that in some industries, definitely, you can't replace a couple of jobs, especially from the industry that I am a nurse. You cannot replace care and cure by AI for the work that a nurse does. The face-to-face meeting that the patient has with the doctor will continue to be there. So I think technology is coming in a lot in many industries, but it also depends on the nature of work and the skill sets that is going to bring to the table, which I really don't think it's going to replace many jobs in the healthcare sector, because at the end of the day, patient care is all about customization, cure, care, and the skill sets which are required to manage it. If you really look at, are jobs going to really move out, and is there going to be a real shift from the process of manual to automation? I mean, let's look at 3 factors which are really keeping all organizations awake today. As I said, the global footprint of talent continues to be scarce. Why are companies still finding it a challenge to find talent? I think, yes, the biggest challenge is how can we customize what we do in terms of HR and what the organization does to employees in terms of what they are looking at HR for a product and service. I mean, does really HR have the products and services that they have in order to cater to the demands and the nature of a changing workforce? Are we able to provide an entrepreneurial way of working with risk-taking abilities? And finally, I think the fundamental straw which remains across every organization is, do we have our leadership values and our culture, right? So I think these are the fundamental things which continue to remain across every organization. And also, HR has to really change and bring about customized products and services for each section of your workforce. And from an AI perspective, I think things will only change when the organization really doesn't have a USP in terms of the talent that it has. And when you have talent that makes a remarkable difference, be it across any industry, I don't think it's going to be very easy to replace that talent. Yes, some of these robots, even in healthcare, you have robotic surgery. But do you have that in every field of the healthcare specialty? Not really. You have it in a couple of specialties. And look at the number of people who are still opting for surgery from a surgeon compared to surgery from a robot. I think there's a huge difference. I think, yes, large chain of hospitals have implemented this across many of their hospitals, but still there is still the fact that, yes, I'd still like to meet a doctor face to face. I still like to clear my doubts. I still like to, understand what the diagnosis from the mouth of a doctor directly than from meeting a robo or looking at some application on the mobile. And yes, for general, for these things are happening, but I think the scale and which there is a the need for it to happen, it's not necessarily at that scale. And I think Shalini summed it up very well. Uncertainty is there, but how do you deal with that uncertainty? And I think the biggest differentiating factor, as I said, are those three elements, which is your customization of your products and services, your entrepreneurship way of working, and fundamentally all of it bound by your leadership and your values and culture in the organization.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Jacob, and gratifying to see that we will still have humans in the workforce and not only have robots and artificial intelligence kind of take over. Very quickly moving to a different part, of the, we, we are all looking at, as I said, that we want to keep productivity up, but we want people to be learning new skills, right? We want to set directions, but we also want them to be innovative. We want to retain our high potentials, but we also want to, reward our current performers. So I'm going to move on to Sarah, you, and I know you've done a lot of work in your organization around empowering the workforce in this digital disruption. Can you share some examples of some of these practices where, all of this of balancing the current versus future while disruption happens? I think you're on mute, Sarah.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. So before I actually talk to you about the disruption to our workforce and our way of working, I'd actually just take you one step back and talk to you about the disruption to the product that we that we are traditionally known for in tobacco. And a couple of years ago, we came up with this heat not burn concept of IQOS. And that is really, for the lack of a better understanding, is sort of more of a digital or an e-product, electronic product, versus the conventional product that we are generally known for. And that essentially is what propelled our change in our culture and our way of working. So that was one of our main premises for doing so. And what was interesting was, so we had our business reason, which is also very important because a lot of this change, in order to implement it, has to come a little bit from the top. And there has to be a corporate agenda to actually drive new ways of working. How did we incorporate it? Well, it was interesting because we had to do what we do on a conventional level, and at the same time we had to sort of give room for our organization to be more innovative. For example, in the past, consumer centricity, or from an HR perspective, employee centricity was not one that we had sort of put on the top of the agenda. So we used to make policies thinking what we think is right. Going forward now, consumer centricity or employees are at the center of every policy that we make. So one of the interesting things that we did, for example, was when we were looking at reviewing our leave policies 6 months ago, we traditionally thought, oh, okay, so we need to enhance maternity, and we need to look at a couple of other things on the flexi working side that everyone else is doing. But we took 2 steps back and we thought, okay, let's ask the organization. What was interesting is that the organization really didn't come up with anything very innovative. They too were thinking along the lines of the organization, of us, because they have been in the corporate sector for a very long time. So for them, they weren't quite. They just wanted enhancements on certain elements. We then leveraged on this concept of an innovation challenge. So an innovation challenge essentially is a platform which allows you to crowdsource your ideas. We went there. We got some very innovative concepts on time off work. So one of them was, for example, birthday leaves, a particular leave related to family time specifically. Things where we can allow employees to take some days off work during the year to do things that they need to do for their family, like attend PTA meetings, instead of actually going into their annual leaves and leverage taking time from there. We then conducted another survey and we got an overwhelming response. And that's how we've developed our new leave policy. The same thing we did when we did flexible benefits, which is something that we're rolling out at this point in time. We actually conducted a hackathon with employees within the organization to actually help empower them and make them a part of the decision-making process. The other thing that we do essentially when it comes down to empowering the organization is being very, very transparent. And there was a lot of discussion, especially in the boardroom, where we didn't know how much information is the right amount of information to give to the employees, whether it be about their own career development or the business numbers or the strategy, etc. And we decided to go all out. We decided to take a risk, and it has paid off incredibly well. I mean, we actually, from a Hong Kong market perspective, we were able to turn around our business in 12 months because we were able to create this common sense, this common purpose and this common goal for the whole organization. So for us, it's primarily been to be as transparent and to find any and every opportunity to include the organization, especially when it comes down to things that affect them. And for us, technology has been excellent because everything that we do has been through various digital or app-based platforms. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. I think it's great to see some of the things you're doing in the organization, kind of, to balance that. I'm going to move to you, Syed. I've personally known you and worked, in a number of different roles you've had with leading technology companies, telecom companies, and now an e-commerce company. What's your view of this balance between, being preparing for the future, but still delivering results for today, and how that disconnect, what have you seen in your experience? How have companies balanced that, kind of a dilemma?
So it's a pretty tricky one, right? I mean, especially because, and I've experienced this in the past in telecom, where you have newer things coming up where you want to support apps like WhatsApp, which, you need them because that's what your customers want, but they're cannibalizing your voice telephone business, and which is a very significant revenue generator for a lot of companies. I was lucky to work for companies that were quite forward looking. So they sort of figured out how to deal with it. I think, at the company level, one of the things that I always found was quite fascinating was how you actually evolve your organization and the capabilities in the organization to deal with that impact. So I'll give you the example of AT&T, where I was in a number of roles over the years. The folks who are dealing with the innovation and who are dealing with sort of the more disruptive parts of our industry were actually empowered. They were not parked under one of the legacy businesses, because that would generally not be a happy ending, because their revenues were very small and they were sort of burning cash to experiment with new things. But we really sort of equipped them with the independence and with the budget and with the, sort of the line of sight and the empowerment to do what they needed to do. And a lot of companies do this now, where they set up a chief digital organization or chief digital officer, and they start to do this, some with success, some with not. We were actually quite lucky because apart from everything else, we sort of gave them so much independence to the point that they had their own offices. They were able to set up separate locations in places like Silicon Valley, in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And we found they were able to move at a very different speed. So these were people who, 1 year the team was being formed, and the next year they were collaborating with Apple to roll out the first iPhone. They had, Samsung and every other major device manufacturer out there sort of working with them to create things for the customers, where we sort of, as a service provider and a hardware manufacturer, we would collaborate. So I think for me, one thing that I found is you need to give that independence. I mean, in my current company, that's a bit different because we are purely internet play, purely digital play. But for the more traditional businesses, I think you really need to give them that room to breathe for the people who are doing some of the newer things. From a more HR strategy perspective, one of the things I found was, and historically, again, in multiple companies, I think the capabilities game, and I saw that on one of your slides, Puneet, that it actually is sort of been one of the key parts of my job in my last couple of roles. The capabilities game becomes very important, and how you play it as a company and as an HR leader. Because, I mean, previously we were thinking about, okay, we have employees and we have contractors, and they may not be on our payroll. How do we deal with them? It's a classic HR conundrum. Then we sort of started getting into alliances and co-development and so on and so forth. Now we have the freelancers and the gig economy people coming in. And, I'll try to keep illustrating each point with a small example. One of the things that I worked with the management team in Lazada, which was taken over by Alibaba a few years ago, in their transformation, one of the things that I worked there in my brief time there was we actually equipped the part-time freelance gig economy contractors who were driving the trucks for them, driving the scooters to do the delivery, and so on, who were sort of freelancers in the same way that Uber has freelance drivers. But we actually went ahead and equipped them with sort of the learning of how to do that role. We even helped them set up their own companies if they wanted, so they could bill Lazada for their services and file tax all in a single central location, so that they didn't feel the pain and the pinch of having to handle all of that while they're driving a truck or a taxi. Right? So that's the second thing. I think it's about managing your total workforce, and increasingly, you have to sort of start wondering at what part do machines and AI come into that concept of a workforce, and you have to start counting them as a pillar along with all the others. And the final thing that I would share, I think where the balance is shifting, and this one, quite frankly, I can tell you, I haven't figured it out. I'm hoping to meet someone who has figured it out, so I can learn from them, is that we have always defined things as professions. So somebody is a surgeon, right? Somebody is a lawyer, somebody is a banker, and there are different specializations in that, but they are professions, right? Even an HR person, and there are different specializations. What is increasingly happening is that professions are ceasing to be as relevant because they're getting disintermediated by technology, by outsourcing, and it's all about how activities are done. So work is moving more and more, especially in companies that are going more digital, using more technology. It's more about how you do an activity. So just like you have the value chain at the company level, you have the activities at the shop floor level, and then it becomes very tricky because you find that if you have an activity of somebody going into surgery, for example, the surgeon is obviously going to be better equipped than a machine right now to be able to do a complex surgery, like an open heart surgery, right? But research is already showing that after the surgery is finished, the stitching of the open wound is now done with better precision by machines than by surgeons. Now, obviously, they're expensive machines, they're experimental, they will not hit the market for a while. But, and the same thing is playing out everywhere. So a lawyer can come up with the right options for that specific client, and they will actually be able to give them the best advice based on the circumstances, based on their humanity and that judgment of that. But the research that lawyers used to do and paralegals used to do and bill thousands of hours for in those huge libraries, that's gone. Very slowly but surely, especially in the simpler jurisdictions, that is disappearing. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, just standard search is able to do that a lot better. So I think for a lot of companies, and as I said, I haven't figured this one out because we have the same problem. We have to start understanding if activities is how the way work is going to be done in future and designed in future, how do we figure out to fit people who are trained as professionals and get them to fit into activities? It's not easy because it's not just the companies that are designed and HR with the competency banks that we have and job roles that we have. It's also an education system that actually teaches people to think a certain way and behave a certain way for their careers. So those are just some thoughts off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, thank you. And great to see some of the innovative work, which you've shared. I'm sure a lot of our attendees would gain from that. Now, I do have, couple of points which I quickly want each of you to comment upon. So if you can keep those, comments to about maybe max of a minute, because I can see a lot of Q&As, which have been lined up, which individuals or attendees want to ask you as well. So let's keep time for that as well. But one thing I wanted to talk about it, if you saw the Thrive research, career and development opportunities, transparency, meritocracy, kind of, fairness in assessments came out as key ingredients for a thriving workforce. Career and development opportunities, I get it, but when we don't even know on what skills are going to be critical in the next 3 to 5 years, how do you help employees on that career development path? We are talking about fairness in assessments. Last 3 years, doing away with performance management or the death of performance management or performance ratings, sorry, not performance management, but performance ratings has been critically discussed. So, and again, I'm just going to quickly, run through each one of you to quickly comment for a minute on how do you think as HR leaders, this could be done because of all of these things which are happening around it. So back to you, Shalini, for your quick comments.
Hey, thanks, Puneet. So I think one good way to look at this might be that, left brain and right brain kind of work. A lot of what we have focused on in the knowledge skills piece of competencies tends to be fairly left brain because of the uncertainty and because we can't quite say for sure what will be the shape of things to come. Focusing on some of the broader skills which allow people to navigate an uncertain period. So, things like empathy, design, storytelling, creativity, all those are tools which are applicable in a variety of circumstances, innovation, and will be really helpful in allowing people to navigate what is going to be a time of great change and great uncertainty. All said and done, it's going to be a fabulous time for those of, for anyone who's brilliant. It's going to be a really hard time for people who, are very, very mediocre. That is going to be a challenge going ahead.
Perfect. Jacob, anything else to add on?
I just want to, I just want to sum up with an example. And then I'll answer the question directly. But I just want to talk about this example, which is about 10 years back. See, when I was working in the airline industry, and you're talking about artificial intelligence, which is picking up today. 10 years back, when I used to work with the airline industry, what used to happen that, before every flight, the crew had to report about 5 hours before the flight. They go to the crew center, where those who are rostered to be on the flight have to report about 5 hours before the flight. 5 hours, why? Because yes, there's briefing, there's debriefing, then, a lot of handover, all of that, which happens from crew control. Now, 10 years back, what used to happen was, if a crew doesn't report for duty on the assigned flight, what used to happen was, they have to clock in before they enter that room to say that they're present for the flight. So if somebody is not present for the flight, the system which was designed will pick up who else is on standby, who's supposed to be on this flight. So you're giving that person about an hour's notice to be ready, and automatically a message is sent to Avis. Avis is a car rental company which used to go and pick up crew and bring them to the crew control room. So automatically a message is sent to Avis. SMS is triggered to to that particular crew saying that you're on standby for this flight and you need to come on this flight. A car will reach you in the next 1 hour at your residence or at your hostel, and you need to come on this flight. And also sometimes it happens there are emergencies which used to happen, like for example, if just before the flight I come to know that this is planned emergency, that I'm not able to take on the flight, who else is available? How can I exchange my roster with that particular staff? So about 10 years back, you had all of this happening on a system. You had all of this happening with automation, and gradually it moved away from a 10-member team, which used to do rostering, crew control, all of that, to basically a one-man department. And all the other resources who are supposed to be in this particular function were moved to what is known as flight dispatch team, where there was less of automation in flight dispatch. So what I'd like to bring to table is, hybrid companies were thinking about this around 10 years back, in terms of what was happening. The way, just an example of how cabin crew scheduling was managed about 10 years back. Now you bring that into context today. You asked about how do companies help people manage careers? How do people, how do companies help people manage in today, in managing in a disrupted world, the workforce of the future. So I think today what is clearly happening is, two things. What companies are putting on table is, Please manage your own time. Please manage your own career. Here are your products and services that we give you. It's for you to determine what you want, because there really is no one size does not fit all. One strand or one engagement strategy does not fit all. And one, your normal career development, you spend 2 years in this role. Laterally, you can move up. Horizontally, you can move this way. All of that is passé. And I think we've reached a stage where people who join organizations and want to be with the organization have the flexibility to choose what they want, whether it is from the list of rewards that the company has in place to reward individuals, the careers which are offered, and manage your time by working for results. We really don't want people, who are managed by, performance management, twice a year, midterm review, end term review, there's a rating. All of that is passé. It's the time of flexibility. It's the time of customization. And more than anything else, what is playing a key role is emotional connect. I think that is what is keeping people together with a line manager, with a department. I think that plays a huge role. I see Shalini smiling because a lot of work happens in this area of emotional connect. And I think, and I think that is what is the key to the future. How you really emotionally connect with your team, with colleagues, and that's what makes the difference. So I think if you marry these two, I just brought in the example of what happened about 10 years back. Bring that forward today, and what is the differentiation you're trying to work in an atmosphere when these things are gaining momentum, and how do you still keep the flock together?
Perfect. No, thanks for a great example as well, and clearly seems like empathy, the social skills, creativity is great around it. So I'm going to move to one last point I want you to talk about, and maybe Sarah, I'm just going to move to you directly around it, which is what about HR itself? How can HR leaders prepare themselves for this disruption, or this future? Both as individuals, which is HR leaders, but also as for the organization?
It's a very interesting question, especially when people talk about preparing to become more digital. There's a lot of focus on that. And what I like to sort of go back is ask them to take a few steps back and think about how relevant they are. I think one of the things that we're lacking in most HR strategies is we're still stuck in the whole notion of running cycles or doing talent acquisition and not really connecting the dot and simplifying and really understanding what the business needs are, connecting them and defining value adding processes or strategies within HR and working towards that. We still sort of are somehow stuck in delivering processes or delivering cycles. Which is the first thing that we need to do. And then we bring in, and in the process, we talk about digitalizing the whole notion of the whole ambit of HR. So for me, I think it's very simple. And I said this in my last webcast as well, really understand what your business needs. And it comes down to being, business centric, or for the lack of a better word, you need to be consumer centric as far as who you're, for your consumers, essentially. So understand where the business is going, align and add value for the business. Even if there are 3 things you're going to do in that year, make sure that those 3 things are really impacting your bottom line. A lot of us HR professionals stand around and say, no matter what I do, I cannot really impact the bottom line because that's something that, commercial is responsible for. I cannot make the direct connection. You know what? If you really try, it does come through. And that's how you'll gain credibility. And that's when your voice will really be heard on the boardrooms. So I think that for me, for the HR leader of the future needs to be the kind of the way the MD today looks at the finance director or the finance professional on the table is the way the MD needs to look at the HR professional on the table going forward. And I think that's something that I would probably end with.
Sure, perfect. Syed, any last tips on how HR leaders could prepare for this disruption?
So, I think obviously have an open mind, and experiment is always a good way to be. If you have the luxury to experiment. I'm very fortunate because my role actually has 5 companies that I sort of look after from a corporate perspective. And they're ranging from, just 200 or 300 people for the smallest one, all the way up to 5,000 people for the largest one. And they're all sort of late stage startups. So they don't have massive amounts of legacy HR processes and practices built in. So we get to experiment a lot. I think from my perspective, you see a lot of articles in HBR, recently saying, death of HR and HR shouldn't exist. I have news for the people who wrote that article. They're very respected people, but you know what, 15 years ago, there were similar articles. The reality is HR just evolves. In some areas, we're a bit slow to evolve and we need to get faster. In some areas, we're good. I personally see the requests that I get from the business and from the employees in 3 buckets. So usually you hear people saying there's strategic HR and there's operational HR. I agree, those 2 exist, but there's a middle category that I'm seeing a lot of emphasis on these days, especially with all these of the talent management specialists and all the functions which sit in that. So I find it quite fascinating. Obviously, the operational stuff, the payroll, the healthcare, all of those things, the shop floor things continue. The strategy continues, which is the mergers and acquisitions, the capability building at the firm level, long-term strategy, all those things continue. But in the middle, there seems to be a massive amount of emphasis nowadays on getting the employee value proposition right, building a really good hiring engine, which brings the right talent in whichever form it is, as freelancers, as employees, closing the back door so that talent doesn't walk out immediately. So understanding how to do engagement, retention, etc., very well. And then, talking about how to reinvent performance management, for example. So I see all 3 buckets right now getting massive emphasis. I think the challenge has been thrown to us as people who are in the profession and as a function to really see if we can live up to that challenge and which of those 3 buckets, or if we can do all 3 very well, then great. But otherwise, which ones we are best at.
Thanks so much, Said. And thank you all for sharing your perspectives on some of the areas we can see on how you could help, prepare for the future, what skills, especially around the emotional skills around it, how the speed of change is impacting that. I do now want to move on in the last 10 minutes to have the opportunity for you to answer some of the questions which our attendees have. I'm going to just pick up randomly because I do see a number of questions on the list. But the first one is around how do you engage remote workers? Any practices around that? And linked to it is, if AI is being used to make decisions, how do you expect AI to make ethical decisions? So AI on ethical decisions, and how do we engage remote workers? I don't know if Dr. Shalini, you want to go first? It's not directed to anyone specific, so I'm just kind of randomly picking.
I can pick the one on AI and ethical decisions because I do spend a lot of time mentoring HR startups and big data companies. I think, just like anything that is data-based, the reality is garbage in, garbage out. So one of the big problems with a lot of AI applications these days, or applications pretending to be AI, is that the data set they have is very limited, especially because they're still in the learning and construction stage of their data set and their algorithms. So what happens is, there will be a sort of application which is judging how high risk a person is for getting diabetes, right? But the data set that application is using is based on people in North America, because that's where the application started. Now you apply that to India with our jalebis and rasgullas and gulab jamuns, that data set doesn't really work very well, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges in AI that's coming up is not just the fact that there's a lack of privacy because all these applications are collecting our data. Facebook and Google have made their billions just farming our data and selling it to others. And that can be misused. But another big challenge is when applications using AI start to make decisions, sometimes the underlying data is poor and it does not lead to the right decisions. And when you start using it for the criminal justice system or for healthcare, you could have some pretty serious challenges. So this is a work in progress. Right now it's in the hype stage, just like blockchain and cryptocurrencies. It will take a long time for it to mature and settle.
So sure. Puneet, if I can add just one part to it.
Yeah.
A new skill for HR is understanding how culture is getting embedded in technology. So, whether it is an AI decision-making system, what is the kind of culture that is getting embedded in that? Or when you're using technology platforms to, work with a remote workforce. So no technology is culturally neutral. And we haven't so far, needed to focus on this issue as much. But this is a new skill for HR. How are we sensitive to what are the kinds of cultural, values we are embedding in the variety of technologies we're working in? That's something I wanted to
Right. Interesting. So can you quickly comment also on engaging the remote workforce or
Uh,
freelancers?
can I just add a point, Puneet?
Sure, sure. Yeah.
See, I think I'd like to give a classic example. I mean, if you look at our industry and the company, as an organization, we obviously are in markets in Southeast Asia and in India, and we have a 20-member team sitting in Kenya. And Kenya is a remote workforce for us. But as I
Right.
think what is key is how do you ensure that the fabric and the life of the organization is in this remote location of 20 people. And that can only happen, whatever system that you have for your rewards or recognizing them or the annual dinners or whatever they have at their level, they will only feel involved if they physically see someone going over there and making a difference to show that yes, you're connected to the head office, you're connected to the corporate office, you're connected to other countries. And that has to be seen in a way of life in that organization. People have to continuously go there, meet them, understand them, talk to them, and make them feel really involved that they are part of the larger picture. The moment remote doesn't work by saying that, okay, here's your, whether it's for performance management, whether it's for reward, or whether it's for anything else, can only happen when that emotional connect. I use the word emotional connect, and I continue to focus on that because that's what makes the difference. Once you have
Sure.
that, then whether you're remote or whether you're anywhere, it really doesn't make a difference because they are part of the fabric of the organization. Others, what really happens is they look at that, I'm being treated like a stepmother. I'm being treated in a different way than from others who are part of, in Taiwan cities who, fancy jobs, fancy perks, but we live in Kenya, in Africa, where there are so many issues that we have over there. So I think the emphasis of the organization is to try and see that how much can you really connect with them, make that difference. And believe me, going out there, being with them, spending that time, and they got to physically see that, yes, we walk the talk to say that you're part of an inclusive workforce. Otherwise, it's just on paper, it's just in a, any amount of PPTs or whatever you make, it'll all go down, right? You'll never get that, you'll never get that edge.
Sure. No, I think thanks for sharing a great, real life example around it. Sarah, I do have a question which is directed at you, and it is a question regarding transparency to say, what is the right level of transparency? There are organizations which are sharing salary structures. There are organizations which talk to employees and tell them where they are in the salary range. And then there are organizations who think compensation is very a secret, right? Which is only for you and not for others to know anything around, not even grade or title or ratings around it. So what's your view on that?
Well, for it, transparency in terms of how it should work in your organization really depends on your organization and the maturity of your organization. If you're an organization that's very closed, I think moving from not disclosing everything to disclosing everything to everyone cannot happen in one shot. So you have to prepare people accordingly. To be honest, in our experience, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to go all out with everything that's relevant. And again, not everything needs to be known, but if it's adding value to the person's career and if it's adding value to the person's engagement level or the employee's engagement level, then why not? So for example, for me, telling everyone else's salaries really doesn't make a difference. What would make a difference, for example, is if I have a salary range and if there's a compare ratio, where do I sit on that compare ratio? And if I'm lower than a minimal range, then why am I lower than a minimal range? You get what I'm saying? So it has to do more about, it has to be done where it really, in a way that it makes a difference and it creates an impact. The part on talent management and the reason why we like to go all out when it comes down to being transparent, and we work on being transparent by actually involving them in the process. So for example, we're in the process of our talent review cycles, and succession planning this time around is actually being done with the incumbent in the room, with the incumbent and his team in the room. And there are people who get to nominate themselves to certain positions. And everyone's quite open. So for example, in the 0 to 1 ambit, if I need, there's somebody being nominated, that means that that person should know that he's also moving in the 0 to 1, and then he gets to sort of pick or nominate himself for something else. So that's essentially, and the reason why we want to do that is the more open you are about how this process works with people, and the lesser you do it in closed rooms, the less rumor or suspicion there is about the process itself. So when they go and translate it down the line, they're a lot more open and a lot more confident in the way and there's a lot more confidence in the process that we put in place as well, that yes, somebody's doing the right thing, and this person is not just getting promoted because he you know, is the best looking person in the room, but because he's actually bringing value to the table, and there is a rigorous process that everyone goes through. So really it depends on where you are, but I would start, if you are not there at all, I would definitely recommend you to start, but do it with a purpose. Don't do it for the sake of doing it, is I guess what I would tell you.
Sure. Perfect. No, thank you so much. And a great example of how, you know, doing it with the people themselves and then having them do that with their individual team members. We are right on the hour. So, you know, there are a lot of questions which I still see. We will make sure that we get them answered through the networking part of it. But thank you all. I think it's been a really great and engaging session. Personally, I've learned a lot, great practices which you've shared. I hope our attendees have enjoyed that as well. Back to you, Ruby.
Thank you so much, Puneet. You've beautifully handled this entire discussion with so many experts on the panel. So thank you so much, Puneet, Jacob, Sarah, Syed, and Dr. Lal. It has been wonderful having you on this panel. A lot has been learned here, and a lot needs to be learned as well. So all of us can move to the networking zone right now, where our audience is eagerly waiting for with a lot of questions. We could only pick up two, unfortunately, due to paucity of time. So thank you once again, everyone. And before we move on, please note down the secret code for this session, which is hashtag disrupt10. That's DISRUPT 10. That's numeric 10. And do not forget to visit our partner booths and learn from them, chat with them. Please move on to the networking zone, where our speakers will also be stepping in with your questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Till then, happy learning. Thank you so much.